With children looked after by our local authorities, because vulnerable children are at significant or intolerable risk, as figures we've obtained show councils here struggling to finance increasing demand for services. The number of children in care is up by more than a quarter in 9 years, and higher in this region than anywhere outside London. 13,000 children are looked after by our 23 councils, and the numbers are up in 20 of them by more than 3/4 in Halton and half in Blackpool, Tameside, Oldham and Warrington. To cope with demand, all bar 3 dipped into their reserves last year. Manchester overspent by £10 million, Cumbria, Liverpool and Lancashire also way over budget. And just 8 councils are providing a good enough service, 15 either requiring improvement or rated inadequate. Ofsted says children in St Helens are at significant risk. Blackburn describes a disaster waiting to happen, while Oldham Council says children face an intolerable risk. I've been to the town to find out why. At 6 months old, this little boy has been with foster parents Susanna and Paul since birth. He's one of 3 babies they're caring for at the moment because their parents can't or won't look after them. The figures for Oldham are stark. 3 years ago, there were nearly 400 children in care. Today, it's nearly 600. At the same time, the number of foster carers is falling.
You're getting a phone call really before the child's moved on, that when that child's moved on, can you take this next child? So it's incredibly busy.
Oldham's Children's Services was downgraded to requires improvements in 2015. A council report last month revealed that it's still in decline and faces an intolerable risk. It can't deal with the soaring levels of at-risk children, and its social work team doesn't have the experience to cope with huge caseloads. With the town having lost tens of millions of pounds in government funding since 2010, services to support families have been cut back. The council leader describes it as a perfect storm.
Families that 20 years ago might well have been able to just about manage, the mix of welfare reform, of insecure work is placing more and more pressure on those families, which mean that they are struggling to cope, and the result of that is that more and more vulnerable children are coming forward for assistance from places like Oldham Council.
Is part of the problem that you're just not running the service as well as other areas?
No, not at all. We have taken significant steps as a result of the Ofsted report that we had 3 years ago here in Oldham. But the difficulty is, if demand continues to rise and funding continues to reduce, then we're running just to stand still or running to go backwards in some cases.
Having been taken into care with her 3 siblings aged 10, Paige knows how traumatic an experience it can be and how vital it is that help is available.
We're young people who haven't been able to be supported in life, and that's why we've had to come into the system. And the authority is supposed to be there as that support, as that corporate parent for us. Why wouldn't you do that? You do it for your own children, so why not do it for us?
Now aged 19, Paige is living independently and is helping the council to improve its children's services and support care leavers like her. Adapting to increasing pressure with less resources appears the only option.
You can't keep doing things the way you've always done them. So we're constantly rethinking of better ways, more streamlined ways that we can deliver it, but keeping ultimately at the heart of that the outcomes for children and young people.
The government told us £270 million is available for innovative schemes to support vulnerable children, and councils overall will get £200 billion in government funding by 2020. Desperate local authorities say that's not enough to avert a growing crisis. And we also welcome Donna from the British Association of Social Workers. Now, Donna's been a social worker for 30 years and now investigates complex cases. Donna, so what's it like working in childcare at the moment?
Well, if I could just set the landscape, because we hear a lot of language used to describe it. The National Audit Office says that we've had a 50% cut in real budget funding for local authorities. And the Local Government Association are calling for funding. And BASWA, the British Association of Social Workers, support that call.
How is it affecting day-to-day life?
And the reason that we're doing it is because we are seeing families being separated, and in other circumstances they wouldn't be. We're seeing parents who are struggling with this increased vulnerability from the cyclones of financial cuts that keep coming through our communities. And social workers are also now feeling the pressure where 55% of social workers, according to a survey that BASWA undertook, are saying they're not sure they see themselves in the profession in 18 months' time.
Well, on the pressure that they're under, this latest inspection in Oldham found that 1 in 5 of the social workers there had less than 2 years' experience, should be dealing with 10 cases, some are dealing with 21. What's that like on a day-to-day basis?
So, living with that, what we have to understand is that social workers are humans too.
Massive responsibility.
And living in a community where their own families will be struggling to get services. And so people feel under pressure, their mental health is affected. And we have core values in our profession of, intending to help people and to meet their needs. And when we can't do that, that's crushing for us.
OK, well, how is this an acceptable situation under your government's watch?
Well, I don't believe it is an acceptable situation. Donna is talking of her incredible experience that she has and her association have. I think the issue is that these services have to be paid for, and consequently councils are having that overspend. I think nationally the figure is about £2 billion, and I would be entirely supportive if that overspend was met by central government in this case, given that councils have to be able to step in these cases. I think it's worth noting as well, as was alluded to in your report, the increase in demand. I think
Oldham Council says that's due to your austerity, though. It's creating this perfect storm, welfare cuts, pullback of support services.
There may well be a number of reasons, and I'm entirely open to people putting them
The
to
councils
me.
have had their budget cut by 40% under your government in some of the most deprived
In
areas.
some of the central grant from government, yeah, that is invariably true. But what needs to happen, therefore, is if they have a deficit in this particular area, given that they have to have that statutory duty to provide those services, then I think it's only fair that that should be met by government.
James, if they do have the reserves, is that not a legitimate use? I mean, what else are they for, apart from emergencies?
I've news for you, Kevin. There are no reserves. This is entirely created in Whitehall under a government that's pursued an austerity agenda for a near decade. What we're seeing are the consequences of this austerity agenda, and it's looked after children and young people generally that are shouldering the worst effects of this. As Donna has rightly said, it's a combination of factors around people in work, but in work poverty, some of the changes to the welfare system, and not enough local government funding. In Bury, the borough I represent, we've lost £80 million in our budget since the Tories came into government with a coalition government 8 years ago. The implications of that are seen in a rise of looked after children. But what I would also say, absolutely support what Donna has said. The risk is, and the danger is here, that it isn't just the looked after children that are affected, but it's those children that are on the fringes of being in receipt of those services if they're not taken care of before they fall into crisis.
Some councils are running services better than others, so aren't they, with pretty similar challenges?
This is an argument that doesn't stand up to scrutiny around budgets. Competence is all very well. Competence, absolutely. You have to hold your local council, you have to hold your members of parliament to scrutiny on their competence. But competence cannot manufacture funding. Now, what we're seeing in an explosion of looked after children and vulnerable children going into care or on the fringes of going into care is a wholly lack of patient funding, a kind of dynamic approach to need, whether that's mental health, whether that's social care, whether that's looked after children or kids at school.
OK, Donna, the government's saying there's £270 million available for innovative ideas to help. Do you have any?
There are lots of innovative things happening. I think what we have to counter is that 20 out of 23 boroughs in our northwest area are on their knees. We're losing a generation of young people here.
Employing enough social workers would be innovative, wouldn't it?
Well, giving social workers the resources they need. We're only one resource, giving families the resources they need so they're not in need of help from services like ours to the point where we're having to separate children from families. There are great innovative ideas. One's actually happening in Stockport, the New Beginnings project, which is working with parents who will then work with other parents to strengthen communities. But that is not a remedy for the catastrophic impact that we're having in our communities.
Yeah, well,
now.
it paints a desperate picture, doesn't it? You say government should step in, and where's the money coming from? You constantly say that there's no magic tree.
Well, there's no magic money tree, of course there isn't, but where councils have got a statutory obligation, I absolutely agree with the two other guests, that as they're obliged to fund those services, if they are not in a position to do so, then it's for central government to step in.
In the budget, does Philip Hammond need to announce something?
I think he does, yes.
And not just force it onto local councils like he did with the social care precept?
I think there's various issues there. We can talk about council's reserve, etc. But if, at the end of the day, if there's not sufficient funding for council's statutory obligations, then yes, he does.
James, where would you get the money from?
Look, I think what we've got to be more ambitious for our towns and our councils and our young people. It's not acceptable to just concentrate on the statutory, the minimum requirement. You know, there are children going into care with complex needs that get overlooked. As councils retreat from any spending they once had, and the services retreat, we lose all ambition for our young people, and we cause it's a false.
The money's got to come from somewhere,
but it's a false economy. Let me give you an example. It's a false economy.
Okay.
If faced with a child going into care that could have been prevented with some funding further upstream, that costs thousands and thousands of pounds more when they reach crisis or have to go to out-of-borough care. Some £35,000 for 1 year.
And we're seeing a cut in that. We're seeing 500 million taken from our first aid early intervention services, with another 183 million cut left to come. So whatever funding the government say they're going to bring, that has to be in the context of all the other cuts that we're already bracing for.
OK, we're going to have to leave that there. Thank you for coming in, Donna. We've got more from James, Frith and William.